So let's start with light. For the purpose of explaining each of these ones, I'm going to use images online. Some of them are credited down here. And the first thing we talked about was light. Now, the most important part of light is the exposure of your image. This is something you would adjust in your camera, but sometimes something happens or you forget to adjust them and you end up with a dark image like this. And this is where post-production editing comes in handy, because you can fix that with the exposure slider and further adjust the lighting with the other adjustment tabs underneath it. So when you underexpose an image, notice that we have some nice blues in the actual image, some people, those are people, and we have this bridge, we have the waters. And what happens when we underexpose the image, we can barely see our subject and the waves as well as the blueness of the sky. So you're essentially losing everything, and if this was my final image, I couldn't share it anywhere because it's not a proper image. It is it has a big mistake in it. We can't see anything basically. So exposure is something you want to make sure your image has. And again, if you couldn't accomplish that while taking the photo, you can always do it in post-production editing. And in Lightroom, apart from the exposure tab, we also have the Selective Adjustment tab, where we can use the graduated filter, radial filter, or the adjustment brush to affect certain areas. So it's really simple. We just need to have an eye for a well-exposed image and know where we need to stop when we're adjusting them. Now, when you enter Lightroom in the Develop tab, the first thing you see on the right side, the top right, is something like this. This is called a histogram, and it's a really helpful tool to know how exposed or underexposed your image is. And usually it also has colors as well. Right now we're only talking about the lighting, so it's white. So if we look at each one of these, we can see that these little shapes differ when our exposure is affected. So we have underexposed, and right now we see it's on the left, and that is because it's going to be really difficult to bring it back in the post-production editing. Now, I did say that we could, but like I mentioned earlier, you would bring a lot of noise into the image. So if you want to do that, you want to make sure you have a highly detailed image in a raw format, a good file size, so you have the option or a chance to fix the image. But if my image was taken in JPEG and it's a really underexposed image, chances are I'm going to further ruin the image by bringing a lot of noise and chromatic aberration into it. So if you look at your image when you first bring it up in Lightroom and you see this, the white bars all the way to the left, you will know that you will have a difficult experience trying to revive the image. Now, the next thing is that just know that if it's on the left, it's towards the darker side. If it's on the right, it's towards the lighter side. With the images, if you look at the histogram in the Lightroom, you will see that there's also colors, and a lot of times those colors, like the blues and the reds, will be on the left, and that is because those colors are underexposed. But right now it's white, so this is just talking about the overall lightness of the image. So here it's giving us some tips, but this is something you would use when you're taking the photo. So you can read this if you want, but we're just talking about what each of these graphs are trying to tell us. Now, if it's a little bit moved to the right, like so, it is it's acceptable. It's not too underexposed. It's not properly exposed either. But a lot of times this is what you are looking for, like the example here. If you're taking a night photo, you cannot fully expose the images because you're trying to capture the stars and the moon. So you would want something that's underexposed, but not in a bad way like this. So it's just a bit to the middle between the underexposed and the neutral exposed. So again, it's giving us solution for when we're taking the image, and this will bring noise as well if you try to expose it. But again, if you're taking a night image, you wouldn't want to expose your image. You just have the right settings in your camera and you've shot the sky, and naturally the things that would shine through those darkness is the stars or the moon. So you would need to actually further darken the sky to keep the brightness of the stars and the moon. And this is the safest exposure, as it mentions here. When you're dealing with like portraits or a landscape, this is what you should be looking for. You want your image to be nicely exposed. And this way you can have a lot more control over the other parts of the editing, like the color and the detail. And this way your subject, which would usually be closer to the camera, can be visible, and you won't have to deal with noise either. Even if you did, it would be a really tiny bit and you can just get rid of it. But because it's already nicely exposed when we first bring it in, we won't be having a lot of difficulty trying to edit the image. Now, if it's exposed to the right, this is again, it's the same thing. It's in between the worst and the best. So this would be something you would have in a sunny sky, for example. It's not fully exposed, it's exposed the right way, and you can actually use post-production editing to enhance the lighting. This is not that bad depending on the image and the kind of exposure you were going for when you first set your camera. But these three fields are not something to worry about that much. This is the best setting you can get, but again, it differs on which type of image you have captured. And finally, we have overexposed. Overexposure is going to look like as if someone turned on a flashlight and is putting it straight in your eye. It's kind of hard to look at, and it essentially ruins the image. So, especially if you're shooting directly at the sun, your image is going to be overexposed because not even the camera can look at the sun like that without special settings. So try to avoid these two at all costs and save yourself the trouble of editing and try to recapture the image. Of course, if you are a pro, you could kind of save the image, but that would not be something that I would recommend if you're just starting out. Try to look for this, and if it was one of these two, it's acceptable. Now that we know what the lighting looks like, we can go back to see how the colors are and what we need to avoid when we're setting the colors. I will see you in the next lesson.